Warriors, rise. America's falling behind. Warriors, I think we've known this for a long time. You're going to see all the clips on TikTok, Instagram, but what I want to do is show you my favorite clips from this. I'm not going to do a lot of narration. We're going to watch a few clips from the digital asset future of finance yesterday, Warriors. Crypto is here to stay. All they're working to do is find out regulation. My name is Coach JV. I am the top health, mindset, and crypto coach in the world. Remember, what you believe in your heart, you think in your mind, will eventually become your words and become your reality. If you can see it in your mind, eventually you can hold it right here in your hands. What you repeatedly do gets ingrained in your subconscious mind. What gets ingrained in your subconscious mind becomes an unconscious activity. If you want to join our private Warrior Academy, if this is all confusing to you and you're trying to figure out this new quantum financial system, you get access to my portfolio, exit strategy, subconscious mind programming, goal setting, vision board creation, nutrition. There is nothing like it. It's a holistic approach to getting your shit together and working together to go in this quantum financial system. Click the description in this YouTube video to join today, or our free Facebook group or Facebook group. Okay, let's jump right into this word. So we're going to watch a few clips out here. I just wanted to show you these clips. I broke them up into different clips because this is the greatest time in human history. So let's watch these clips together. I'm not going to do a bunch of narration. I just want you to soak this beautiful conference in.
The United States has a huge opportunity with crypto. But my fear is that this regulatory state, it's going to crack down on an industry that the regulators, they really don't understand yet. And it's going to force the next generation of financial tech to be created outside of our country. Well, we can't let that happen. So, Mr. Brooks, it's good to see you again. Where do companies draw the line and say that enough is enough with this anti-innovation, quote, regulation by enforcement, and then just decide to take their industry elsewhere to another country? Where's the line?
Well, Mr. Budd, it's good to see you, and thank you for that question. What I would say is, in some aspects of the industry, the line is super clear. There are some products that are legal in other countries and are just not legal here. So I take some of the investment products we've talked about earlier today, for example, exchange-traded funds. One of the things that makes crypto risky is that consumers may not understand the difference between one token and another token. And so they may want to diversify, much as I own an S&P 500 mutual fund. We don't allow that in the United States. We do allow it in Canada. We allow it in Germany, Singapore, Portugal, and a number of other places. So if you're a developer of those products, there's no fuzzy line. It's super clear. You can't do that here. So you have to go abroad. Okay. For some other places.
Can you say why we can't do that here?
Sure. It's because the Securities and Exchange Commission has consistently refused to approve products that other G20 nations have approved.
So we're behind the curve?
Unquestionably.
Okay, now here's one thing about human behavior. Look at him and his confidence. Look at his confidence, Warriors. Go watch Gary Gensler and go watch Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell, his coughing and that uncomfortable human behavior. Warriors, they know that we are behind the 8 ball. They know that we're way behind, Warriors. All right, so let's jump right into this document or this video here.
Ranking member of the committee, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Brooks, let's step back from digital assets and blockchain for a moment. Let's talk about where the internet was, where it's come to, where it's going, right? We're trying to level set here for policymakers. So originally, the internet was a read-only format, in essence. We're consuming information. And then there's additional layers that we place on. It became much more interactive. But counterintuitively, much more interactive, but much more centralized in Web 1, Web 2. What we're hearing now is Web 3. Policymakers need to understand the nature of Web 3. This is a hearing about a component of Web 3. Now, along those lines, what are the characteristics that defined Web 1 and Web 2?
Mr. McHenry, thank you very much for that question. I think that's critical to understanding what we're all trying to build here. So the characteristic of Web 1, if people remember their original AOL account, was an ability to look in a curated walled garden at a set of content that was not interactive, but was presented to you on AOL the way that Time Magazine used to show you the articles they wanted you to see inside of their magazine. Just you could see it on a screen. The innovation of Web 2 was that suddenly you could not only read content, but you could also write content. This is when the blogosphere became a big thing. People remember this from the late 90s, the early 2000s. The reason for the centralization of the internet, of course, was that all of that activity was being monetized by a very small number of companies. Facebook, as the chairwoman mentions, Google, and 2 or 3 other companies. What makes Web3 different is the ability to own the actual network. And that's what crypto assets themselves represent, is an ownership stake in an underlying network. So when you hear people talk about, for example, layer 1 tokens, what they mean is this is your reward for providing the ledger maintenance services, the computing power to the network that on Web 1 and 2 was done by Google, right? So now people in my hometown of Pueblo, Colorado can actually own the Ethereum network, but they can't own the internet. That's owned by Google and a few other companies. That's what the project of crypto is all about, is allowing people to directly own the networks that have native assets that are supporting it. And that's the nature of decentralization, where the token holders are the people who control the asset,
Okay, so
not
the
Google.
token holders, for our language here on the Hill, those are digital assets, right? Which are the keys to open up the ledger for you to participate, right?
Correct.
So describe to us how those digital assets fit into this internet revolution, Web3.
So the concept is that you have sort of application layer tokens and you have protocol layer tokens. So if I'm an owner of Bitcoin, let's say that I'm a miner of Bitcoin, somebody who actually creates Bitcoin. The Bitcoin is the reward I receive for doing the work to keep the network operational. And that allows me to own a piece of the Bitcoin blockchain. Or take Ethereum, which is easier to understand. The Ether token represents an ownership stake in the network, but on top of that network are all kinds of apps that get built on the network, much like the apps on your phone depend on the underlying network existing that lets the phone operate. And so people will make judgments about which network is likely to win, and they will invest in the tokens in that network much the same way you might invest in Google stock because you think Google is going to scale access to the original internet. The difference being here, you can vote on what happens in the future of a proof of stake network, for example. You can get rewarded through a proof of work token for maintaining a ledger on something like Bitcoin. But the real message here is that what happens on the decentralized internet is decided by the investors versus what happens on the main internet is decided by Twitter, Facebook, Google, and a small number of other companies.
Okay, so
that's exactly why they want to regulate this, Warriors. That's exactly why they want to regulate this. All right, here we go.
At what point should we become concerned about the possibility of a bubble? At what point should we become concerned about the possibility of a bubble? Let's start, if we may, with Mr. Brian Brooks.
Well, thank you, Congressman Green. It's terrific to see you again, and I always find your questions extremely perceptive. What I would say about that question is a lot of the price volatility of cryptocurrency has to do with the early stage of the market and the thinly traded nature of the asset compared to, for example, U.S. real estate, global equities, or anything like that. I think the message I'd land with this committee in response to your question, however, is some of the things that make U.S. equity and debt markets more stable and less volatile have to do with the fact that there's a lot more price discovery in those areas. And what I mean by that is, you know, in the US, we have regulated equity mutual funds. We have derivatives products and futures products that allow the free trading on a 24/7 basis that provides the market with forecasts of what's happening in the ecosystem. In the world of crypto, the US hasn't responded by developing those tools for price discovery yet. And so the result in a relatively new, relatively thinly traded market is that one person unwinding their position can have a massive effect on the price. The last point I would just make very quickly is something like 80% of Bitcoin holders have never sold a Bitcoin. And so when you hear about a day when there was a giant price drop in Bitcoin, often it turns out that there was one or two large traders who were unwinding a leveraged position, and the vast majority of holders have enough confidence in it that they've literally never sold a unit of it. So I would argue we need more liquidity and more price discovery to tamp down volatility, not less.
Boom. That tells you right there about the bear markets, Warriors. It's a certain amount of people just because of the thinness, right? So if one big whale moves their money, that's what moves the markets, Warriors. That's why they're able to manipulate it. So as people come rushing into this crypto asset, you're going to see massive price appreciation. Then it will stabilize, but you are very, very early, Warriors.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In 2019, the average daily turnover value of the U.S. dollar constituted 88% of foreign exchange market transactions globally. This dominance by the dollar in global marketplace is a key reason why the dollar remains the reserve currency of the world. Mr. Brooks, welcome back to the committee. It's good to see you again. I think we've actually talked about this subject before in the past, but as digital assets become more common in the global marketplace, with the total digital asset market reaching almost $3 trillion, as Ranking Member McHenry just said, how do we ensure the U.S. dollar remains the reserve currency?
Well, Mr. Lukemeyer, it's terrific to see you again, and I'd give you a couple of thoughts on that important question. One is, if we start with stable coins before we talk about other crypto assets, I've said for a long time that the secular reduction in dollar holdings as a percentage of global central bank holdings is alarming. And this has been going on for more than 10 years at this point. So dollars as a share of the European Central Bank, the Japanese Central Bank, et cetera, has shrunk from 80+% to more like 60+% in a short amount of time. What that tells me is that in the future, with the rise of China and other major economies, the US dollar can't take its primacy for granted, and we need to start thinking about competing on utility, on features, not just based on a post-World War II monetary system that we could take for granted for the last 2 generations. And that's one of the reasons that I've been such a supporter of internet-enabled dollars, which allow us to compete on features, not only on history. I think that's really critically important.
Okay, I want you beast mode. Brian Brooks is a beast, Warriors. I just earned so much respect for him during this. I mean, just a massive amount of respect. This guy should be leading. Think about what he just said. We can't operate on a post-World War II economic system, Warriors. They are purposely collapsing the economic system, but what we're finding is America's really far behind. Look at the Congress. Look at how old they are, Warriors. I mean, these guys don't even have their shit together. They don't even know. We'll just keep watching videos. I don't want to offend anybody. They need to put their Depends on. Let's go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm a small business owner in Texas, and still own those businesses. I'm a car dealer and a former professional baseball player. And when I'm trying to wrap my head around a new topic like cryptocurrencies, I try to relate it back to something I understand, like baseball or business. Now, some of you may know this, but modern day baseball can really be attributed to Babe Ruth. He brought in the live ball era of the time and introduced power to the baseball diamond. And before this, teams would play small ball that was very conservative, where teams would literally play for 1 run a game. The entire objective was simply to get the ball in play so they could try to steal their way around the base paths. And there was nothing wrong with this old way of playing. But when the White Sox won the World Series in 1906, the entire team had a total of 6 home runs all year. But Babe Ruth came along. Babe Ruth came along and totally changed everything. In 1920, he set the American League record of home runs with 54. To put that in perspective, how fantastic this feat was at the time, the previous mark to be set was by Sock Seabold in 1902 with just 16. This introduced an entire generation of new baseball fans, and for the first time ever, the New York Yankees, over 1 million fans came to see them in a single season. Now, with that being said, many of you are becoming the Babe Ruth in the financial services space. You're introducing a blockchain technology to the financial services industry and working to upend the tradition and the traditional way of doing business. And while many economists and so-called experts have been calling on the downfall of cryptocurrency and discounting the future of blockchain technologies, all of you were working tirelessly to create something new in order to bring this new technology to the masses. Unfortunately, it would only take a few misguided curveballs, we'll say, from Washington to undo some of the progress you've all put into this motion. So my first question to you, Mr. Brooks, can you talk about some of the negative consequences that could happen if we take a heavy-handed approach to regulating this developing technology?
Well, Mr. Williams, as a long-suffering Dodgers fan, I share a lot of the things you're talking about. And I think the era you're talking about was an era when baseball went from focusing on not losing to an era where it focused on winning.
Oh, sorry. This guy's a juggernaut. Listen to what he says right now. From losing, sorry. Try not to narrate this words.
And winning and not losing are not the same thing. So I come back to Mr. Vargas's question a second ago, which I think is the right way to answer your question. Mr. Vargas asked the question of people have the potential to lose a lot of money. These things are volatile, they're risky. How do we protect them from those kinds of issues? There are two ways of answering that. One is to prevent as many people as possible from accessing this amazing technology. For example, the way the current legal regime works is certain kinds of assets can only be purchased by accredited investors, meaning rich people. So the only people who can get rich on this are people who are already rich. That'd be one way of protecting people from losing money, is to make sure that only the richest can access it. Another way of addressing it would be to make it safer the way that we made equities safer 40 years ago, right? We created mutual funds, diversification, sector funds, and other things that make it easier for regular Americans from places like my hometown in Colorado to buy equities without having to be stock experts. Strangely, in the US, we've refused to do that so far. So we don't allow crypto mutual funds. We don't allow people to diversify the way that they do in Canada, Germany, Singapore, the United Arab Emirates, and a series of other regulated economies around the world. So I would argue the way to win is to bring more people into the system more safely, not to keep them out at their own peril.
Boom. God, this guy, man. Let's keep going. We got one more, and I'll let you guys go. I love you guys.
To interpret based on our interpretation of law for what is and is not a security at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Haas. Mr. Brooks, if I could to you, thank you also for being here. If I could, I think there are, obviously there are people who believe that cryptocurrency is difficult, maybe even impossible to track. Can you talk about that as it relates to the blockchain? And while we talk about illicit activities, alleged illicit activities, oftentimes will be investigated by federal authorities. Could you explain maybe the fallacy in that, as if you were talking to our local police chiefs or local sheriffs?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Kussoff. I actually do this talk at local Rotary clubs and things around the country all the time, so I think I can do that pretty well. I think the easiest way to understand it is let's contrast blockchain transactions with normal banking transactions to see how much easier it is to trace them on a blockchain than it is in a banking transaction. So let's imagine for a moment that I would never do this because this would be flagrantly illegal, but let's say I bought you lunch, okay? And let's say that afterwards you wanted to Venmo me your payment back, right? So you hit your Venmo button on your iPhone and you sent me money. What many people don't understand is that there are 7 or 8 different steps in the Venmo transaction. So all Venmo does is send an instruction to your bank. Your bank then receives that instruction, they write it down in their books and records, and then they then send an instruction to an underlying transfer network. It could be the automated clearinghouse, could be the FedWire system or something else. That system then contacts my bank. It inquires whether my bank has enough money to pay you. Once that's been done, then there's a debit from my account. It's very complicated. And in any one of those steps, information could be lost, there could be a breach, something bad could happen. Versus in a blockchain, there are no intermediaries. I'm not sending instructions to a third party to send instructions to another third party to eventually send you money. I've sent you money. And when the block is validated, I can see that my wallet address transferred that value to your wallet address. Simple as that. The easiest way for people to understand how easy this is, because we've had a lot of talk of hacking and cyber security issues, the reason that we found the bad guys in the Colonial Pipeline hack was because they asked for Bitcoin. If they had asked for diamonds, if they had asked for cash, if they'd asked for almost any other thing, we'd never have caught the bad guys. We caught the bad guys because, not in spite of, because they used Bitcoin and we could tell exactly where the money went.
We'll end with that, Warriors. Love you guys. I appreciate you guys. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I mean, should I say anything? I don't even want to say anything after this. You guys know how I feel. Warriors, rise. Get your shit together. Let's go.